Okay, so we're going to talk about how you would actually write a cadential 6/4 chord. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with the treble clef and our bass grand staff. I'm going to go ahead and do this one in A major. So you put A below the staff, and then you put a colon to indicate that that's the key. We're going to go ahead and put in the key signature. And then let's make this in 4/4. And so our progression should be 2/6 on a weak beat that goes to a 5/6/4. This is a cadential 6/4. So I'm going to put in my voice leading. 6 resolves to 5, 4 resolves to 3, and that indicates the notes above the bass. And then it resolves to the 1 chord on an off beat, on a weaker beat. We're actually going to do this in minor, using a minor 2, a diminished 2, and a major 4 chord. So you can see the most common ways to resolve these. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is that one of the best ways to resolve this, gives a really nice voice leading motion, is if you go from 4, 3, 2, and 1 in the soprano. So that will give you a perfect authentic cadence, and that will also provide you with smooth voice leading. So if you can remember 4, 3, 2, 1, we're moving from 2, 5, 6, 4 to 1, you're in good shape. It's going to be the same thing for all 3 chord progressions we do today, whether you have a 2/6, a 2 diminished 6, or a 4. It doesn't matter. You can use 4, 3, 2, 1 in the soprano for all of those. But let's concentrate only on the minor 2/6 first. So if we're in the key of A, the first thing I'm going to do, because it's easiest, is I'm going to fill in my bass line. So my first note here is going to be a D, because I have a 2/6 chord. So that chord is a second scale degree of A. So you have a B in the bass as the root of the chord. Then you have a D natural and an F sharp. That gives you a minor 2 chord. Then when you put it in first inversion, you have to use a third of the chord in the bass. So that leaves us with a D in the bass. I'm also going to fill out my soprano at the same time. So the fourth scale degree of A is D. So if I remember 4, 3, 2, 1, then I've basically got 2 of my voices done for me already. So then let's just fill in our soprano. Third scale degree of A is going to be the C sharp. Comes down to B for the second scale degree, and then A for the 1 to give us our perfect authentic cadence. So now let's go ahead and finish the bass line. So if I write a 5/6/4 chord, I'm not actually going to be writing a 5 chord in second inversion. This is where it gets confusing. The 6 to 5 and 4 to 3, that refers only to voice leading. So what you're basically doing is you're putting the root of the 5 chord in the bass. So in this case, in the key of A, that would be an E. Okay? From there, you're writing a 6 above the bass and a 4th above the bass. So if we start with a 4th above the bass, we would have an A here, and then that 4th has to resolve down to a 3rd above the bass, so we would have a G here. Now we know the G is our leading tone, so we can go ahead and resolve that because we know it's going to resolve back to the A. So now for the 1 chord, I leave this E across both beats for beat 1 and 2 because it's really showing us that we're moving from a 1/6/4 to a 5 chord on beat 2. So 1/6/4 on beat 1 and a 5 chord on beat 2. So I'm going to leave this as it is, and I'm going to fill in my bass for the 1 chord. I'm just going to put my A down here, so I've got an octave down. And I'm going to go over this in a little more detail in a minute once I finish this progression. So now that I have my A, G, and A, I need to figure out what the rest of my voices are. One thing you don't want to do, you don't want to double the root of the 2/6 chord. Remember, we want to try and make it sound like a 4 chord, so we doubled the third, which was correct between the bass and the soprano. So now we have 2 chord members left to deal with. We've got the B, which is the root of the 2 chord, and the F sharp. So we have to think about where it makes the most sense to put that B in the F sharp. If I put the F sharp here, then it has to skip. So I don't want to put it there. I also don't want to put it an octave higher. So that means that the F sharp is going to go here in the alto, because what that allows is for me to put my B here, so that now my B moves in stepwise motion, and my F sharp will actually be able to resolve in stepwise motion as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring the F sharp down to this E. So by doubling the E between the alto and the bass, I'm really making this sound like a 5 chord instead of the 1/6/4 chord that is actually written as. So if you look at this chord on the first beat, on the downbeat of the second measure, or that's actually the first measure, you have an E in the bass, it's doubled here in the alto, and then you have a C and an A. So the chord you actually have, if you spell this out, you have an A, a C sharp, and an E, but then the E is in the bass. So that is a 1/6/4 chord, but we don't hear it that way. We actually hear it as a dominant triad. So here's a 1/6/4, kind of like a suspension that falls into our dominant triad. So here on the second beat, when you follow your voice leading, the 6, which is the C in the soprano, C sharp in the soprano, moves down to a B. So that's correct. 6 moves to 5 above the bass. Then you have 4 moving to 3 above the bass. So this E here in the bass, it has an A, which is a 4th above it, moving down to the G sharp. So that's correct as well. So the only thing we're missing here, the only chord member we're missing now, is the downbeat of the 1 chord. We've got an A is doubled in the bass and the soprano, and then we also have an A in the inner voice. So we have to have the third of the chord. So we can't just hold this E over, even though the E is a 5th of the 1 chord. Because if we just use that E, we're going to end up missing our third. So what has to happen here is the E skips down to a C sharp, so that we have a complete chord there. Okay, so let's do this again, but let's do it with the 2 diminished 6 chord, and I'm going to do it in another key just to keep the variety up here. So we've got an F sharp and a C sharp. Again, we'll use a pickup. We're going to use the 4, 3, 2, 1 motion. In the soprano, we're going to keep that the same. And I'm going to write this in B minor, so we get our diminished 2 chord. So we've got a 2, 6, and then everything else is basically going to stay the same. We've got our cadential 6/4 that goes to 1. So I want to go over this one more time because it's a little bit confusing. But this 5/6/4, the downbeat is not a dominant chord. It is actually a 1/6/4 chord. And then this 1/6/4 chord, where you have the 5/3 aspect of this, that 5/3 is your dominant. But we don't write it as 1/6/4 going to 5. Older textbooks did indicate that this was a 1/6/4 going to 5, and there were different ways to bracket it. But in more modern textbooks, we have stopped doing that and we just label this 1, 6, 4 going to 5 as a voice leading chord. The reason for that, again, is because we really hear this as a dominant that has a suspension on the downbeat, or some sort of suspension-like motion on the downbeat. All right, so we're going to do the same thing here. In the key of B, your second scale degree is C sharp. So the third of a C sharp triad is going to be E. So I'm going to put that in the bass. And then here, for the downbeat, the 5, 6, 4, again, you can just count up to the fifth scale degree because we are going to have the fifth of the 1 chord in the bass. So the fifth of the 1 chord and the root of the 5 chord are actually the same. So we can just go ahead and write an F sharp here. So again, if you think about that, if you have a B chord, B, D, F. So then if you take that B, D, and F sharp and you put it in second inversion, you have an F sharp, a B, and a D. Okay? And this is all in the treble clef. So this is a 1, 6, 4 chord. If you have a 5 chord, that's going to be built on an F sharp. So you have an F sharp, an A sharp, and a C sharp. So there's your 5 chord. Both the 1, 6, 4 and the 5 share the same bass note. So because of that, even though this chord right here, the 5, 6, 4, is really a 1, 6, 4 chord, we write it as a 1, 6, 4, and we just call it a 5, 6, 4 or a cadential 6, 4. Might be a little bit confusing at first, but if you memorize that, eventually this will become more familiar to you. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is just complete our chord progression. So the F sharp holds over, so I don't need to articulate it again, but if I want to, I can. So this one will do it a little different. I'll just re-articulate that, and then I'll put my B down here for the bass on the 1 chord. And actually there is a slight mistake there. Since this is in minor, that should be a minor 1. Okay? So now we're going to put in our bass line. So the 4th scale degree of B is E, and then it comes down to the D, then the C sharp, and then it resolves down to a B. So 4, 3, 2, 1. So now let's go ahead and fill in the remaining 2 diminished 6 chord. So I need a C sharp, I've got the E doubled, and I need a G. So let's go ahead and put the G right here. If I put the C sharp here, it's getting a little bit too close to the 4, and I'm not going to be able to resolve the C sharp the way I want to. So you might find that through trial and error that it's best to put the G here, but I'm just going to tell you right now that's probably the best thing for you to do. So then I'm going to put my C sharp there in the tenor. So then we have to follow this motion, the 4-3 motion, right? So that means a 4th above the F sharp is a B. It comes down to your A sharp, which is a 3rd above the bass. And then that's your leading tone. So we know, this is displaced a little bit. Okay. So again, this B, it comes down to the A sharp, which is a 3rd, and then it goes right back up to the B, so the leading tone resolves. So you can't forget to resolve that leading tone. So then the next thing you do is you just fill in the remaining voices. So you've got a B, a D, and an F sharp. Well, in order to move the shortest possible distance, I'm going to move down to the F sharp. And then here on the offbeat, I can actually just keep that F sharp the same, because that is now the root of my 5 chord. And then I just resolve down by a skip again to the D, so I have a complete chord. So now we're going to do one more This one's going to be an E flat major. So 4, 3, 2, 1 in the soprano. I'm going to make this one really close together. Instead of a 2 chord on the offbeat, I'm going to have a 4 chord. Everything else about the progression will stay the same, except in order to deal with that 7th a little more smoothly, I'm going to actually turn this into a cadential 6/4 that uses a 7th chord. So it goes 8 down to 7, 6 down to 5, and 4 down to 3. And this works really well with a 4 chord because it's a nice way to handle that 7th resolution. And then we're going to end on 1 here. Okay, so we're going to do the key of E flat. So I need to put in my key signature, B, E, and A. And I'm going to go ahead and write in my soprano and my bass line. So 4, 3, 2, 1 in the key of E flat is A, G, F, E flat. So I just write that in, and I did it again. Not giving myself enough room for this. Okay, so let's write in that soprano line again. Okay, and then I'm going to write in my bass line. So I have an A that moves to a B flat. I'm going to hold that B flat over. Always happens that way with cadential 6/4. And then I'm going to have an E flat here at the end. Okay, so now what you do is we have to fill in the inner voices. So again, our inner voices, we want them to move the shortest possible distance. In this case, I'm trying to keep this really compact. So I'm going to put my C here and my E flat there, the 2 chord members that I haven't included yet. And then my E flat is just going to hold over here. And my C is going to come down to my B. So what I've done here is I now have my octave in the bass. I also have a 6. That would be between the B flat and the G. And I also have a 4th. That would be between my B flat and my E flat. So now I just follow the voice leading. So the 8 has to come down by step to my A flat. My 6 has to come down by step to a 5, which it does. The soprano moves down by step. And then my 4 has to move down by step to a 3. So the 4th scale degree, this E flat, it does in fact resolve down to a D if I fix it. And then you always have to watch your spacing between the chords. You want everything to line up. And then I just resolve this A down to the G. But let's go ahead and talk about this 1 chord. So for the 1 chord, since this is a 5/7 effectively, and it is a complete 5/7 chord, because you got the B flat in the bass, the D, the F, and the A flat, that means the root of the 1 chord has to be tripled. So I've got an E in my bass already, an E in my soprano, so I'm going to have to triple that E flat in the alto. So that leaves me with a doubled soprano note essentially. And then I have to put in my final chord tone, the G. So I'm going to leave out the 5th on the 1 chord. And that's all there is to it. That's how you resolve your predominant to cadential 6/4 resolving to 1.